Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the last track, we took the narration of Fatima bint Qais, proving that there is no alimony to those women who are divorced for the third time, so that is to say, irrevocably divorced. There are many other narrations in this chapter, all giving off basically the same information, so we have no need to go through them one by one. There is a narration in the chapter in which Aisha received the news that Fatima bint Qais moved homes when she was in the Iddah period. Like we said, the Prophet told her to spend her Iddah in the house of Sharik and then moved her to the house of Ibn Maktoum, who was a blind Sahabi. Now Aisha rejected this action and did not approve of Fatima moving homes during the Iddah period. However, we say that Fatima did so through the order of the Prophet, and so Aisha disapproving of this action carries no weight. Just like she objected to a woman, a donkey and a black dog cutting off your salah if they walk past you whilst you are in the prayer. She said, "You have likened us to donkeys," and she disapproved of this ruling. However, we say no, this disapproval of hers carries no weight, because as long as we know this comes from an authentic hadith, then that suffices us. And the opinion of a Sahabi, however great he or she may be, carries no weight. Normally in a divorce, the husband keeps the wife in his home if it is a revocable divorce. Aisha and others who may object on the basis of the ayah in Surah Al-Talaq, وَلَا تُخْرِجُوهُنَّ مِن بُيُوتِهِنَّ وَلَا يَخْرُجْنَ إِلَّا أَن يَأْتِينَ بِفَاحِشَةٍ مُبَيِّنَةٍ وَتِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ وَمَن يَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَ اللَّهِ فَقَدْ ظَلَمَ نَفْسَهُ لَا تَدْرِي لَعَلَّ اللَّهَ يُحْدِثُ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ أَمْرًا. And do not take them out of their homes, meaning the marital home, and they must not leave the home either. We find that Fatima bint Qais left the home of her husband, so they should not leave the home except if they are guilty of adultery. These are the limits of Allah, and whoever transgresses the limits of Allah has wronged his own self. You do not know, perhaps Allah will bring about reconciliation. So that is to say, in a revocable divorce, you do not know that perhaps Allah will reunite the husband and wife, that is to say, the husband takes back the wife, which is obviously the desired outcome. And this is why the wife should stay in the home of the husband, to facilitate the raja'ah, taking back the wife. However, in a third divorce, we know the husband is not allowed to take back the wife, even if he desperately desires it. This is why she does leave the house at the third divorce. And also, just thinking about it rationally, at the third divorce, what's the point in keeping her in the home when you are not obliged to spend on her? The whole point about keeping her in the home is that you need to spend on her, otherwise who will spend on her? We also find in one of the other narrations in the chapter that Umar ibn al-Khattab objected to Fatima bint Qais leaving the house of her husband. He said, "La natruku kitab Allahi wa sunnata nabiyyina." We will not leave the book of Allah and the sunnah of our Prophet. The book of Allah is referring to the ayah which we have just quoted, that you must not kick them out of your homes, nor should they leave, up until the end of the ayah. But we already said that this is about the raj'iyya divorce. And as for the sunnah of the Prophet, well, the sunnah of the Prophet is narrated to us by Fatima bint Qais. So we have to take it. We have to say that the woman divorced thrice is not to stay in the house of her husband, nor does she receive any alimony from the husband. However knowledgeable you may be, even if you are as knowledgeable as Umar and Aisha radiallahu anhuma, you are still bound to make mistakes. In another narration also in the chapter, Aisha says, when she heard about this incident, that Fatima bint Qais did not spend the Iddah in her husband's house, she said, "It was not good of her to mention it," or "there is no good in her to mention it." But we say, of course, there is every good in Fatima bint Qais to mention this hadith, because it is knowledge being conveyed from the Prophet, and we get to learn about the Sunnah. So again, we would disagree with the stance of Aisha on this matter. Let us move to the next chapter. The irrevocably divorced woman and the widowed woman is allowed to leave the house during the daytime due to a need. Just one hadith in this chapter from Jabir ibn Abdullah. He says, "My maternal aunt was divorced, and she went out of the home to pluck the dates from the date palm tree, and a man scolded her for it, that she had left the house whilst in her Iddah period. So she went to the Prophet to ask him about this, and the Prophet said, بَلْ فَجُدِّي نَخْلَقِي فَإِنَّكِ عَسَى أَن تَصَدَّقِي أَوْ تَفْعَلِي مَعْرُوفًا. He said, certainly you can pluck the dates from the dead palm tree, for it may be that you will give charity from these dates or do some act of kindness. So what the Prophet is saying here is that perhaps you will give charity to the poor, or maybe do an act of kindness, for example, use these dates and give them as a gift to somebody. We take from the hadith that a woman who has been divorced irrevocably is allowed to leave the house during the daytime for a particular need, such as in this scenario in the hadith. Many scholars say that she is allowed to do that during the daytime, so leave the house for a need during the daytime, but not during the nighttime. Other scholars, such as Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, said that she is not allowed to leave if she is ba'in, meaning separated irrevocably. She is not allowed to leave neither during the day nor during the night. But he said she is allowed to leave for a need during the daytime if she is a widow. So that's the 4 months and 10-day waiting period. However, we say that if she is ba'in, which means irrevocably divorced, then her husband does not have any rights over her, and hence she can leave the house during the daytime and during the nighttime, as opposed to the irrevocably divorced woman, because here now the husband does have a right over her, and hence he can keep her back. So we could say that she is allowed to leave the house during the daytime for a particular need, but not during the nighttime. What about a woman in the waiting period because of the death of her husband? Well, the husband did not choose to die away from her. So it's not the same as a divorce. So he still has rights over her. And so in the 4 month and 10-day waiting period, she's not allowed to leave during the night time, and she is allowed to leave during the daytime for a genuine need, such as shopping and so on. So note that there's a difference between the widowed woman in her iddah and the woman who is divorced thrice in her iddah period. So as for the widowed woman, then her husband still has rights over her even after his death. But as for the one who is divorced for the third time, the ba'in divorce, then her husband does not have rights over her. We said that the widowed woman is not allowed to leave during the night time, even for a need. That is true, but she is allowed to leave during the night time for a necessity. However, having said all of that, along comes the obvious question. Nowadays we have career women, so if her husband dies and she has a full-time job, are we now to say that she has to take a break from her job for 4 months and 10 days? And which employer would accede to that request? We cannot see that happening. Therefore we have to say, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, fear Allah as much as you are able to. And here, if she has to go for the job, then so be it, because in not doing so, it will cause her a greater harm in terms of being able to earn a living. However, she must observe the other obligatory duties in terms of not adorning herself and so on. Let's move to the next chapter, that the iddah of a pregnant woman comes to an end when she gives birth. This narration from Subay'ah al-Aslamiyah had been married to Sa'd ibn Khawla from the tribe of Banu Amir ibn Lu'ay. He was one of those who participated in the Battle of Badr, and he died in the farewell pilgrimage, the Hajjatul Wada'. Subay'ah was pregnant at that time, and not much time passed after his death, meaning after the death of Sa'd ibn Khawla, that she gave birth. And then after that she embellished herself for the suitors. A man called Abu Sanabil from Banu Abdiddar said to her, "What is this I see you all adorned? Perhaps you are hoping to get married. By Allah, you will not be able to get married until you spend 4 months and 10 days in the iddah period." So Subay'ah went to the Prophet to ask him about this, and the Prophet gave her the fatwa that she ended her iddah period, so she became halal from the time she gave birth, and he ordered her to get married if she wants to. We take from this narration what we take from the last narration, because in both of these narrations we have a particular man giving a particular verdict to a woman. In the previous narration it was the aunt of Jabir. In this narration it is Subay'ah al-Aslamiyah. They're both being told something or given a fatwa by a particular man, and they both go and verify this fatwa. And so this is what needs to be done. If you're told something, make sure you verify it, that it is authentic, and do not just take it on face value. And in both occasions we find that the fatwa they were initially given were both wrong, and that the Prophet corrected what they were told. We find from the hadith that if there is a clash between two iddah periods, one iddah is if the woman is pregnant, her iddah period finishes when she delivers the load. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَأُولَاتُ الْأَحْمَالِ أَجَلُهُنَّ أَن يَضَعْنَ حَمْلَهُنَّ. And those who are pregnant, their ajal, their waiting period will be until they deliver the load. But the other waiting period is the widowed woman who waits for 4 months and 10 days. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَالَّذِينَ يُتَوَفَّوْنَ مِنْكُمْ وَيَذَرُونَ أَزْوَاجًا يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ أَرْبَعَةَ أَشْهُرٍ وَعَشْرًا. So 4 months and 10 days. So if there's a clash between these two waiting periods, which is exactly what is happening with Subay'a al-Aslamiyya here, then precedence is given to the pregnancy waiting period. That is to say, until you deliver the load, then you are free to marry again. So in such a case, your waiting period may just be half an hour even. That is still possible. As for if a man marries a woman and does not consummate marriage with her and then he divorces her, so that is before consummating marriage, then there is no iddah period for her to observe. Rather, she is totally free from him, and if they want to get together, they have to undertake a brand new marriage contract. So they start from scratch. As Allah Jalla wa Ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا نَكَحْتُمُ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ ثُمَّ طَلَّقْتُمُوهُنَّ مِنْ قَبْلِ أَن تَمَسُّوهُنَّ فَمَا لَكُمْ عَلَيْهِنَّ مِنْ عِدَّةٍ تَعْتَدُّونَهَا. O you who have Iman, if you marry believing women and then you divorce them before touching them, so that is before intercourse, then these women do not have to observe an iddah period for you. There are scholars who say that if he just enters into privacy with her, then she would have to observe an iddah period. So they say it's not just about conjugal relations, but rather just entering into privacy with her would mean that he has to give her the full mahar, and if he divorces her now, she would have to observe the iddah period, just as if he were to have intercourse with her. However, if a man marries a woman, and before entering into privacy with her, or even having conjugal relations with her, he dies, then the woman will need to observe 4 months and 10 days. And this is another difference between a death and a divorce. The divorce happens because the husband wanted it, but death is not his choice. Also from the differences, a divorced woman observes 3 menstrual cycles as her iddah period, but a widowed woman does not count the menstrual cycles, rather she counts the months. It is just 4 months and 10 days. It's nothing to do with the menstrual cycle. So there's another difference. And also previously we mentioned another difference, that the woman divorced for the 3rd time can leave her house by daytime and by nighttime because her husband does not have any rights over her, yet a widowed woman is not allowed to do that because her husband, even after his death, does have rights over her. So these are 3 differences at least that we have mentioned. Going back to this clash of the evidences, one evidence tells us that the pregnant woman waits until she delivers the load. The other evidence tells us that the widowed woman waits for 4 months and 10 days. So which one is Am and which one is the Mukhassis? Well, we say they're both Am and they're both Mukhassis. So both of these hadith are making takhsis of the other. And hence it would be impossible for us to know which hadith we need to take the exception from. And this is why we need this particular hadith to decide the matter. We need to look to an external evidence, meaning external to both of those ayat which we have just narrated. If it wasn't for this particular hadith, we would have to say that a pregnant woman whose husband has just passed away, she has to wait in the waiting period for the longer of the 2 periods, meaning the longer of the either 4 months and 10 days or until she delivers the load. Look to see which period is longer, and that's how much she would have to wait. But because of this hadith, we no longer need to adopt that approach. We can also take that after the iddah period is finished, then the woman can wear her normal clothes. The opinion of Abdullah ibn Abbas on this matter, of where there's a clash, is that he did say that she would spend the longer of the 2 waiting periods. And this is what we would have said as well, had it not been for this hadith. But again, this is another scenario where we would not agree with a highly knowledgeable Sahabi. Previously we had the case of Aisha and Umar radiallahu anhuma, and now with this mas'ala, with Ibn Abbas, we would not agree. In one of the narrations of the chapter, Ibn Abbas said, عِدَّتُهَا آخِرُ الْأَجَلَيْنِ. Her iddah is the longer of the 2 waiting periods. Let us move to the next chapter, about refraining from adorning oneself during the mourning period. Let's take this first hadith in the chapter. Zaynab bint Abi Salama reports that she went to Habiba, the wife of the Prophet, when her father Abu Sufyan had died. Habiba sent for a yellow perfume or something like that. She applied it to a girl and then rubbed it on her cheeks, and then she said, "By Allah, I do not need perfume, except that I heard the Messenger of Allah والسلام, say on the minbar, لا يحل لامرأة تؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر تحد على ميت فوق 3 إلا على زوج 4 أشهر وعشرة." It is not halal for a woman who believes in Allah and the last day to mourn for the dead beyond 3 days, except in the case of a husband. When her husband dies, she mourns for 4 months and 10 days. So this idea of mourning in Arabic is ihdad, and what it means is that a woman refrains from adorning herself and putting on perfume and putting on anything that would make her attractive to a suitor. This is what ihdad means, and it is from the rights of the deceased husband. So the woman leaves off a few matters. Number 1, she leaves off perfume, all types of perfume, except, as the Prophet said, when she becomes purified from her menses, then she applies a little bit of perfume on cotton, and she would then apply the perfume on the place of the hayd, so on the passageway, and this would be to neutralize any offensive smell from the menses blood. So that little exception is okay, but nothing beyond that in terms of perfume. Secondly, she does not apply the kuhl, because that is the beautification of the eye. And even if she needs to apply the kuhl for medicinal reasons, she is not allowed to do that, because the Prophet did not give permission to the woman who wanted to do that, as we shall discuss in the hadith coming up. And thirdly, jewelry in all its forms, be it on the head, on the ear, on the nose, on the wrist or ankles. What about wearing a watch? Well, this could also be part of jewelry, as it is a form of adornment. It would be safer for her, if she wants to know the time, to keep the watch or a clock or a pocket watch, let's say, in her pocket, rather than wearing it, because it will be similar to wearing bracelets. What about if she has a gold teeth? Not for a genuine need, but for adornment. She must take it off. And then fourthly, clothing of adornment. She's allowed to wear clothes of any particular colour, be it yellow, green, red, whatever. But what is not allowed are the adornment type of clothes, the embellished ones. And fifthly, from what is obligatory upon her, is to stay in the home. Like we said before, she is allowed to leave the house by daytime due to a need, for example shopping, and she is allowed to leave the house by nighttime due to a necessity. For example, in those days you had to go out to relieve yourself. They did not have toilets built inside the home. So what we're talking about is a necessity, a darura, by nighttime. During this time of 4 months and 10 days, can she go and visit her parents? The answer is no, because she can visit them afterwards. Examples of necessity could be if she's living in a dangerous area, either through natural danger, such as floods and so on, or through man-made danger, such as there being dangerous people in that area. They might break into a house and harm her. So in a case like this, she is allowed to leave the house and spend the ihdad period elsewhere if need be. What about speaking to other men? Well, in this particular case, she's just like any other woman. She's allowed to speak to other men and look at them without desire, obviously. So there's no difference on that front. The basic idea of the ihdad is to restrict her only in those areas which would beautify her and adorn her and encourage suitors to marry her. That is what is restricted primarily. And this is what ihdad is. We find from the hadith that the woman does not carry out the ihdad for more than 3 days. So it can be for 3 days or less, unless it is her husband, in which case it would be for 4 months and 10 days. So how do you mourn the dead? What is it all about? Well, it is about giving yourself time to let go of this grief. And that is for 3 days. So what would happen is that you would stop your normal activities, such as, for example, every day you go out to open your shop, or run your business, or work, or some other daily activity that you do. It will be difficult to do that whilst you are harboring all this sadness and sorrow because of the loss of a loved one. So give yourself these 3 days to vent out to this sadness. So this mourning then, is it recommended or something which is merely permissible? Well, we say it is not something recommended, rather it is permissible, because if a person can just go along with his usual daily routine as if nothing has happened and he's completely content with the qadr of Allah Jalla wa Ala, then this is a higher status and a higher level of Iman. However, not everyone reaches this level of Iman, therefore we have to allow some period for those people to vent out their sadness. And so therefore it is permissible for you to do that for 3 days, but no more. Let us take 2 more hadith. A woman came to the Prophet and she said that the husband of my daughter has passed away, but she has a problem with the eye. Can she put collyrium on it? He said that 2 or 3 times. Then he said, إنما هي 4 أشهر و10 وقد كانت إحداكن في الجاهلية ترمي بالبعرة على رأس الحول. It is only 4 months and 10 days, whereas in the Jahiliyyah one of you, meaning one of you women, would throw away the dung after 1 year had passed. Let's take another narration. Humayd said to Zainab, what is this throwing the dung after 1 year has passed? And she explained that when the husband of a woman died, she went into a hut and put on her worst clothes and did not apply perfume until a year was over. Then an animal like a donkey or a goat or a bird was brought, and she rubbed her private part over it, and most of the time this animal would die. Then she came out of the house and she was given dung and threw it, and then thereafter she used perfume or something else which she liked. So we take from these narrations that the woman in the ihdath for her husband is not allowed to put on kuhl even if she wants to and needs to, because this medicinal kuhl, its benefits are not 100% certain. Yet the mafsada, or the corruption in applying the kuhl to the eye, is 100% known, because you are disobeying the commandment of the Sharia. So this is why we go with what is 100% over what is not 100%. Otherwise, applying medication to your eye, if you know that this is pretty much 100% effective in healing yourself, is permissible. Is she allowed to wear glasses? Well, the answer is yes, because glasses are not from adornment. You wear glasses because you need to. It is not adornment. It is not like kuhl. But on the other hand, wearing something like colored contact lenses would be adornment, and hence would not be permissible. And we can take from this that taking medication from that which is haram is impermissible, because applying the kuhl is haram, and so taking medication from it would be impermissible, as we have heard in the narration. These things like khamr, alcohol, and intoxicants of different sorts are haram because they're detrimental to the health. So you cannot use them as medication. You are allowed to consume khamr if, for example, you have a food item which is blocking your throat and you're going to suffocate unless you wash it down, and you only have a cup of wine, let's say, available. You're allowed to consume this wine for that purpose. Otherwise you could suffocate. But you're not allowed to consume the khamr if you are dying out of thirst, because khamr is going to dehydrate you even more. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمْ يَجْعَلْ شِفَاءَكُمْ فِيمَا حَرَّمَ عَلَيْكُمْ. Allah has not made your healing in that which He has made haram for you. If, however, we find that in a particular medicine there is some khamr used only as a preservative, then it is permissible to take that medicine, because in taking that medicine you will not be intoxicated, as the khamr is only acting as a preservative and it is not enough to intoxicate you. Even if you were to drink or consume much of that medicine, it would not intoxicate you. Otherwise, we know that if much of a particular drink would intoxicate you, then even taking a little bit of it is haram. From the narration, we take a point of benefit for the mufti, in that if he knows a ruling, then he should not succumb to pressure from the one who is asking the question, because the questioner may want the mufti to give a particular fatwa, and so the mufti must not succumb to any pressure, because the Prophet repeated no in his answer. So he's standing firm, even though we have a situation where somebody is suffering. We also take from the narrations how great the right of the husband is. Even when he's deceased, he has rights over the wife. Some ulama said it's 4 months and 10 days because after 4 months, as we know from the authentic hadith, the soul is breathed into the embryo, and so they say it is to make sure that we know whether she is pregnant or not. But this opinion is not correct. because you can know whether she's pregnant or not just after one menstrual cycle. As for why it is 4 months and 10 days, we are not entirely sure. It's just one of those things which we have to follow the evidence. However, it appears that it is a third of 1 year. So 1 year is 12 months, a third of that is 4 months. And as for the 10 days, if we say that 1 month is 30 days, then a third of that is 10. So it's as if they are taking a third of a year and a third of a month and then adding them together. In the days of Jahiliyyah, as we have just read in the hadith, the woman would spend 1 whole year, that's 1 whole lunar year, and the Sharia has certainly reduced that amount. Question: is it obligatory for the woman in the ihdad period to wear black? The answer is no, because there's no evidence for that. She can wear any color. Remember, the idea is there must be no adornment. And we can contrast the ihdad period from the Jahiliyyah. In the Jahiliyyah period, the woman would be in a hut. She would not put any perfume on. Okay, that's fair enough. But she would not even take a bath. And that is extreme. We do not say in the Sharia that the woman in the ihdad is not allowed to take a bath. Of course she's allowed to bathe. And as we know from the hadith, it is a right upon every mu'min to bathe at least once in 7 days. And this has to be the minimum. And back in those days, water was not in ample supply. Nowadays it is. So it should be even easier. And then she would use a smaller animal, maybe a bird, or perhaps an animal part, the ear of a donkey, the tail of a donkey, and she would wipe her private parts with it. And the narration says, most of the time this animal would die because of the smell and the stench. Remember, she has not taken a bath for 1 year. Then, after all of that, a dung of an animal would be brought to her and she would throw it away, as if to say this whole year which has passed is even more trivial than this dung. It is also vitally worth pointing out that her iddah period finishes if she gives birth to at least a mudgha mukhallaqa stage. So that has to be after 80 days. And a mudgha mukhallaqa is simply that the child has the features of a human being, even if the soul is not blown into the child as of yet. The iddah period also is obligatory, according to the majority opinion, on the woman who is divorced in a revocable divorce, but not on the woman who is divorced thrice, because she is not actually the wife anymore. The majority say that it is also obligatory upon a dhimmiya wife, so a Christian or a Jewish wife, because we are talking about the right of the husband. Let us take another hadith from the chapter. From Atiyah radiallahu anha, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تحد امرأة على ميت فوق 3 إلا على زوج 4 أشهر وعشرة ولا تلبس ثوبا مصبوغا إلا ثوب عصب ولا تكتحل ولا تمس طيبا إلا إذا طهرت نبذة من قسط أو أظفار. A woman does not mourn for the deceased for more than 3 days, except for the husband, in which she does it for 4 months and 10 days. In that time period, she does not wear a garment which has been dyed, except the garment made from dyed yarn. Neither does she apply kuhl to the eyes, nor does she touch perfume, except a little bit of incense when she becomes purified from the menses. Thawbu asb is an item of clothing which comes from Yemen, and it is made from yarn which is already dyed, as opposed to dyeing your clothes with color. So there's a difference. The principle, as we have stated before, no clothing of adornment. The thawbu asb was not a clothing of adornment. She does not put on the kuhl. We have discussed that already. He also says she does not put on or touch even any perfume, except after she has become purified from the menses, because the menstruation blood gives off an offensive smell, so you should put some perfume around that area of discharge. A little bit of qust, which is incense. Both qust and adfar are types of incense. And previously we had given a list of things that she is not to do during the ihdad. Let us now move on to the Kitabul Li'an, the book of invoking curses. This word li'an comes from la'ana, which means to curse each other. This takes place between husband and wife, and the reason is because the husband makes a qadhaf on his wife. He says that my wife is guilty of zina, but the husband does not have 4 witnesses. Now he cannot keep his wife because otherwise he would be a dayuth, and especially if the wife is pregnant, he must not own this child. You are not allowed to take a person as your son or daughter when you know he or she is not your offspring. Now normally for qadhaf, if somebody does not bring 4 witnesses, he gets lashed 80 lashes. But there is an exception made for the husband. Allah Jalla wa Ala says in Surah An-Nur, وَالَّذِينَ يَرْمُونَ أَزْوَاجَهُمْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُمْ شُهَدَاءُ إِلَّا أَنفُسُهُمْ فَشَهَادَةُ أَحَدِهِمْ أَرْبَعُ شَهَادَاتٍ بِاللَّهِ. Those who accuse their wives of zina but they do not have any witnesses besides themselves, then the testimony of one of them 4 times witnessing by Allah. So what happens is that the husband testifies by Allah 4 times that his wife committed zina. So he says, I testify by Allah that my wife such and such a person committed zina. He must say this 4 times. And on the 5th time he says, may the la'na of Allah be upon him, meaning that husband, if he is lying. Now at this stage, the hadd of zina will be established on the wife, unless she can also take 4 testimonies by the name of Allah that he is lying. So she says, I testify by Allah that he is not speaking the truth. She must say this 4 times. And on the 5th time she says, and may the anger of Allah be upon her if he is speaking the truth. Now if she does that, then they are both simply just separated and are never allowed to be married again, not even with a new contract. Never ever. And despite that fact, they are still not mahram to each other. In other words, she would still have to observe hijab in front of him, yet they are never allowed to be married. And as for the mahar which he gave her, no, he does not take back the mahar. This is not khula. She says, may the ghadab or the anger of Allah be upon me. This is because the one who knows the truth and then conceals it, the anger of Allah is upon them. And this is worse than the la'na. So when we say غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ in Surah Al-Fatiha, this refers to the Yahud. Why? Because they knew the truth, yet still they concealed it. As for the Nasara, they were just ignorant from the beginning. So the Yahud are far worse. The Nasara are simply from the Dallin, and the Yahud are from the Maghdubi alayhim. And the reason why qadhaf punishment is not given to the husband, this is the 80 lashes, it's because if the husband accuses his wife of zina, this will damage his own reputation. Why would he go to the extent of damaging his own household, family, his own reputation? In other words, it is very likely that he is speaking the truth. And because of this weight, the punishment of 80 lashes is waived from him. Let us take this first narration. Sahl ibn Sa'ad as-Sa'idi reported that Uwaymir al-Ajlani came to Asim ibn Adi al-Ansari. He asked him, tell me about a person who finds a man with his wife. Should he kill him and then you would kill him? Or how should he act? Asim ibn Adi went and asked the Prophet, as Uwaymir asked Asim to ask the Prophet. So he did so, and the Prophet did not like this question and did not reply. And when Uwaymir asked Asim what the Prophet said, Asim told him, you did not bring anything good. The Prophet was not happy with the question. And to that Uwaymir said, by Allah, I will not rest until I have asked him about it. So Uwaymir went to ask the Prophet. He asked the same question, tell me about a man who finds another man with his wife. Should he kill him? But in that case, the state would kill him in return, as a life-for-life situation. And the Prophet said that the Quran has been revealed, meaning the ayat of Surah An-Nur, about you and your wife. So go and bring her. Sahl says that they both invoked curses, meaning Uwaymir al-Ajlani and his wife, they made li'an. And after that, Uwaymir said, I would have lied against her if I keep her. And he divorced her with 3 pronouncements of divorce before the Prophet had commanded him to do so, meaning without the consent of the Prophet. In another narration, Sahl ibn Sa'ad as-Sa'idi said that Uwaymir's wife was pregnant, and so her son was ascribed to her but not to Uwaymir, and her son could inherit each other with the normal shares as prescribed by Allah. In this situation about the child is not ascribed to the father, because the father has acknowledged that this is not my child, he belongs to someone else. So you cannot ascribe it to the father after the li'an. Of course, the child is always ascribed to the husband of the woman as long as they have not made li'an. But if li'an is made, the child is not ascribed to the husband. You'll remember we took the hadith al-waladu lil-firash walil-ahir al-hajar when Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas had a dispute with Abd ibn Zam'ah. This child does have a biological father, we just don't know who it is, but the husband of the wife, in this hadith Uwaymir al-Ajlani, could not be the Shar'i father of this child. In a case like this, when they are separated, what would happen if the male Zani comes and says that this is my child? Most scholars say, no, we will not ascribe this child to the male Zani because this is not an official Shar'i child. A Shar'i child can only be within the marriage wedlock. So even though everyone agrees that this Zani is the biological father, but he is not the Shar'i father. Some other scholars, the minority, said that if the Zani wants to ascribe this child to himself, then he should be allowed to do so, because there's nothing to say that it should not be the case. As for the hadith, al-waladu lil-firash walil-ahir al-hajar, this is in the case where the husband of the woman is saying that this child belongs to me. If he says that, of course he is given the priority. But in our case, the husband is not claiming the child, and the only one claiming the child is the fornicator. And so we say that ascribing the child to the fornicator is better than the child not having any father. Another question that is asked is that if a man commits zina with a woman and she becomes pregnant, then in this state of pregnancy, can the man marry this woman? Most scholars say no, because the child is not officially his in terms of the Sharia. And as the Prophet said, لا يحل لرجل أن يسقي زرع غيره. It's not halal for a man to water the crops of another. That is to say, to have intercourse with a woman while she is pregnant with a child other than his. This is the majority opinion. The minority says that the child is the fornicator's child because he's the biological father, no doubt. And the hadith of Jurayj, when he was accused by a prostitute who gave birth, that this is his child, and Jurayj made wudu and prayed 2 rak'at, and then he spoke to the child. He said, Man Abu, who is your father? And the child is just in the cradle. He's unable to speak. But miraculously the child spoke, and he said, my father is such and such a man. In other words, the fornicator who committed zina with the prostitute. So the child acknowledged that the father was that fornicator. So based upon this, we can say that there is no preventative factor from the man marrying this woman in this state. However, we say this advisedly because it may open up doors to evil. A man commits a zina with a woman, she becomes pregnant, and then to cover it all up, he just marries her. It could just make life of the fornicators that much easier. And that's something which we do not want. We want to discourage fornication. We find from the narration that Uwaymir al-Ajlani, after the li'an, divorced his wife thrice. Of course, that is completely unnecessary. After the li'an, they are permanently separated, so there's no point in divorcing her. So basically what he's doing is that he's pronouncing 3 divorces on a woman who is not his wife. Of course, that's just plain useless speech. It has no effect whatsoever. And this is probably why we find in the narration the Prophet did not rebuke him for such a practice. We find in another narration as well, before carrying out the li'an, the Prophet gave each of them admonition. He recited the ayat of li'an to them, that is ayah number 6 from Surah An-Nur, and he informed them that the punishment of this world is nothing compared to the punishment of the akhirah. But both of them were adamant that they are speaking the truth. Notice initially, when the Prophet was asked about this, the ayah of Surah An-Nur had not come down to him, so the Prophet refrained from giving a fatwa. And this is how every mufti and student of knowledge should be. When he is asked a question and he does not have knowledge, then just make tawaqquf, just refrain from saying one way or the other. And this is a true sign of knowledge, and it is a sign of maturity, and that brings about respect from the people. In one of the narrations, Sa'id ibn Jubair, who was one of the scholars of the Tabi'een, was asked about this. Does li'an mean that both the husband and the wife must be separated? He did not know the answer to this, so he went to the house of Abdullah ibn Umar radiyallahu anhu. And then Ibn Umar reported to him the narration which you have just heard. In fact, we find many ayat in the Quran which begin with يسألونك or ويسألونك. They ask you concerning such and such a matter. So all of these matters were matters upon which the Prophet made tawaqquf. He refrained from saying one way or the other because he did not have knowledge. If that's the case for the Prophet, then it should be even more so the case with us. We take from the narration that it is legislated, if you are conducting a li'an, to preach to each of them that the punishment of the hereafter is worse than the punishment of this life. You better take the punishment of this life, if it is being whipped or if it is being stoned to death. This is, of course, if you are in a position of authority in a Muslim country. And when you're giving admonition, we can also take that you must use the Quran to do so that you bind the listener to the Quran. The Prophet said that the punishment of the hereafter is far worse than the punishment of this life. The pain and pleasure of this life, if you like, are just a taster or a sample of the pain and pleasure of the hereafter. And this is one of the wisdoms of pleasure and pain in this world, so that we may seek the pleasure of the hereafter and try to escape from the pain of the hereafter, when we know that both pleasure and pain are going to be infinitely multiplied in the hereafter. So it is vital for us to experience both pleasure and pain in this world. We take from the narration that the li'an needs to be in the proper order. The man goes first and then the woman. That's how the Quran teaches us. That is how the Prophet implemented it. We also take that you need to say that I witness by Allah that I am truthful. You cannot say I witness that she committed zina. That will not do. Neither can you say Wallahi she committed zina. Again, that will not do. The ash-shahadatu billah must be used. I witness by Allah. So the shahada and the yameen are combined together. Shahada being the testimony and the yameen being by Allah, billah. Otherwise, the words that you use are flexible as long as they give the basic meaning. Some scholars are very strict about which words should be used, but the point is that we are flexible with this matter. As long as you say, I witness by Allah, or in Arabic it would be Ashhadu Billah. That must be said. We can also take from this that you're allowed to make dua and hinge it on a condition. Notice how he says that may the la'na of Allah be upon him if he is lying. And she would say, may the anger of Allah be upon her if he is speaking the truth. So this is a dua hinged on a particular event, as you can see. So you can make a dua and hinge it on a particular event. And to illustrate this matter, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, a janazah was brought to him. It was of a person who is a mubtadi', so a person of bid'ah. Ibn Taymiyyah did not know if he's a kafir or not. He was not sure. So he was not sure whether to pray his janazah. But this is a big issue, because if he is a Muslim and the shaykh does not pray his janazah, this is a big matter. How is it you're not praying the janazah of a Muslim? However, if this person is a kafir and the shaykh does pray janazah, then this is also a grave matter. How can you be praying janazah of a kafir? So what should he do? The shaykh saw the Prophet ﷺ in a dream, and the Prophet gave him the fatwa. He said, alayka bishart, upon you is to make a condition. That is to say, you would pray his janazah. And when you're making dua for him, you would say, oh Allah, if he is a mu'min, then forgive him and have mercy. So you're making a dua and hinging it on a condition. We take from this that anger is one of the attributes of Allah, sifa fi'liyah, and it does not mean when Allah wants to take revenge, as Allah Jalla wa Ala says, فَلَمَّا آسَفُونَا انْتَقَمْنَا مِنْهُمْ وَأَغْرَقْنَاهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. And when they angered us, آسَفُونَا, he says, we took revenge. انْتَقَمْنَا مِنْهُمْ, we took revenge. So angering us and taking revenge are two different concepts. We discussed previously the hadith of Uwaymir al-Ajlani radiyallahu anh, who made li'an with his wife. In another wording of the narrations, after the two people made the li'an, the Prophet said to them, حِسَابُكُمَا عَلَى اللَّهِ, your account is with Allah. أَحَدُكُمَا كَاذِبٌ, one of you is definitely lying. لَا سَبِيلَ لَكَ عَلَيْهَا, he said, you cannot make any claim against her. And so the man said, Ya Rasulullah, what about the mahr which I gave her? The Prophet said to him, La mala lak, you do not have any wealth. That is to say, you cannot take any wealth from her. You cannot take back your mahr. In kunta sadaqta alayha, fahuwa bima stahlalta min farjiha. If you spoke the truth against her, then the mahr needs to be taken away from you because of the conjugal relations that you had with her. وَإِن كُنْتَ كَذَبْتَ عَلَيْهَا فَذَاكَ أَبْعَدُ لَكَ مِنْهَا. But if you lied against her, then your wealth is even farther away from you than her. In another wording, the Prophet said, after the li'an, Allah يَعْلَمُ أَنَّ أَحَدَكُمَا كَاذِبٌ فَهَلْ مِنْكُمَا تَائِبٌ. Allah knows that one of you is lying, so will there be anyone from you who will repent? Also, a narration from Anas ibn Malik, he tells us that there was another man who made a li'an against his wife, Hilal ibn Umayyah. In the previous narrations, it was Uwaymir al-Ajlani who made a li'an against his wife. In this narration now, it is Hilal ibn Umayyah. He accused his wife of having illicit intercourse with another man called Sharik ibn Sahma. Anas ibn Malik says that he was the first person in the Sharia to make li'an. So after they invoked the curses, the Prophet said, أبصروها, observe her. فإن جاءت به أبيض سبطا قضيء العينين فهو لهلال بن أمية. He says, observe her. If she gives birth to a fair child with lank hair and bright red eyes, then he belongs to Hilal. وإن جاءت به أكحل جعدا حمش الساقين فهو لشريك بن سحمة. But if she gives birth to a child with dark eyelids, as if he's got kohl on his eyes, and curly hair, and skinny legs, then the child belongs to Sharik ibn Sahma. The narrator says that I was informed that the child had dark eyelids, curly hair, and skinny legs. And in another narration, the Prophet ﷺ said, in response to the child that she gave birth to, لو رجمت أحدا بغير بينة رجمت هذه. If I were to stone anyone without any evidence, that is the 4 witnesses, I would have stoned her. However, Ibn Abbas said that this is not the woman to whom these words apply. Rather, he said that this is a woman who openly spreads evil in the society. That is the woman whom the Prophet is speaking about, not the woman of the li'an. Also, we have a narration from Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah that Sa'ad ibn Ubadah said, لو رأيت رجلا مع امرأتي لضربته بالسيف غير مصفح عنه. If I saw a man with my wife, I would strike him with the sword and not with the flat side of it. This statement reached the Prophet, and the Prophet said, أتعجبون من غيرة سعد. Are you surprised at how jealous Sa'ad is? That is to say, protective jealousy. فوالله لأنا أغير منه. But wallahi, I am more jealous of him. والله أغير مني. And Allah is more jealous of me. He went on to say, من أجل غيرة الله حرم الفواحش ما ظهر منها وما بطن. Because of his protective jealousy, he has made haram the shameless actions done openly or secretly. ولا شخص أغير من الله. And there is no person who has more protective jealousy than Allah. ولا شخص أحب إليه العذر من الله من أجل ذلك بعث الله المرسلين مبشرين ومنذرين. There is no person who loves to cut off excuses more than Allah. And it is for this reason He has sent messengers as bearers of glad tidings and warners. ولا شخص أحب إليه المدحة من الله من أجل ذلك وعد الله الجنة. And there is no person who loves praise more than Allah, and for this reason He has promised Jannah. Now we take from the narration of Hilal ibn Umayyah when he made the li'an with his wife. Anas ibn Malik says that this was the first case of li'an where the ayat were sent down. But previously we discussed that the ayat of Surah An-Nur was sent down because of Uwaymir al-Ajlani. So who was the first one to make a li'an then? Was it Uwaymir or was it Hilal ibn Umayyah? Well, the ulama have differed. Al-Imam al-Nawawi says that most scholars say that the first person to make a li'an was Hilal ibn Umayyah. His case was before that of Uwaymir al-Ajlani. But we can also say that there is no problem in the ayat of Surah An-Nur about the li'an being sent down for both of these occasions. That is to say, for both men, Uwaymir and Hilal. We can also take from the statement of the Prophet where he said about the wife of Hilal that if she gives birth to a child who is fair-complexioned and lank hair and qadi'ul aynayn, which is bright red eyes, then the child belongs to Hilal. And if the child born is akhal, which means having dark eyelids and eyelashes as if he's wearing kuhl, ja'ad, meaning curly hair as opposed to long lank hair, and hamshu saqain, that is to say skinny legs, then he belongs to Sharik ibn Sahma. So this is qiyafa. Remember what we said about mujazziz al-mudliji, that you can make qiyafa to decide who belongs to whom in terms of relations. But of course you cannot stone to death anyone on the basis of qiyafa. You have to have the 4 witnesses. And we also have this narration of Sa'ad ibn Ubadah. He says that he catches a man having intercourse with his wife. Is he now going to go and bring 4 witnesses? Absolutely not. He says he's going to strike this man with his sword. He says غَيْرَ مُصْفِحٍ. Now this could mean that he will not turn away from this man, the perpetrator, and strike him. Or it could also mean that he will strike him with the sharp edge of the sword, as opposed to the blunt, broad side of the sword. And notice that the Prophet acknowledged this action, so that a person would be allowed to kill that man. Of course, what we would have to pay attention to now is that the awliya of that man may want retaliation. So in a case like this man would have to demonstrate that the perpetrator was having conjugal relations with his wife. The Prophet says that he is more jealous than Sa'ad, and Allah is more jealous than the Prophet. And it is for this reason that Allah Jalla wa Ala has prohibited zina and all other types of sexual deviancies, like sodomy and so on. And he also says that no one loves cutting off excuses more so than Allah. That is why He sends messengers. Because if it weren't for messengers, the people would have an excuse. Oh Allah, you did not inform us. And he also says that no one loves praise more so than Allah. It is for this reason He has promised Jannah. Because when you know that Allah has promised you this magnificent place, you will be encouraged to praise Him. Let's take the final hadith of the chapter. From Abu Hurairah, he says, a nomad came to the Prophet and he says, my wife has given birth to a dark-complexioned child, and I reject this child. The Prophet asked the man, do you have any camels? هل لك من إبل? The man said, yes. The Prophet asked, فما ألوانها? What is their color? The man said, they are red. The Prophet asked, فهل فيها من أورق? Are there any dusky ones amongst them? The man said, yes. The Prophet asked, how did this happen? Meaning this color change. The man said, لعله يا رسول الله يكون نزعه عرق له. Perhaps it was a strain to which it reverted. Whereupon the Prophet said, وهذا لعله يكون نزعه عرق له. And likewise for your child. Perhaps he had a strain to which it reverted. We find from this narration that this man has not accused his wife of adultery directly, but he has done indirectly, because if it's not his child, then this must be due to adultery. So he has accused his wife of adultery in a roundabout way, but not in a direct way, and so therefore no punishment was due on him. You have to make it clear with regards to adultery. So there was no need for li'an here. We take from this hadith the validity of making qiyas. This is what the Prophet did. This idea of a strain being reverted, what is this? Well, the fancy word for it is recessive gene. Because it could be that your great-great-great-grandfather was dark-skinned, and in between your fathers were light-skinned, and you turn out to be dark-skinned. And this is because of the gene that your great-great-great-great-grandfather had. It's come to the fore after a few generations, and this is quite normal. We also take from this hadith that you should think positively of your wife and do not be suspicious, as this is bound to open up the doors for shaitan to whisper evil thoughts in your mind about your wife. Just another point of benefit, let it be known that the li'an takes place between two spouses who are mukallaf. So one who is pre-pubescent does not take the li'an until they reach puberty. And it matters not whether the husband is Muslim and the wife is Muslim, or whether the husband is a Muslim and the wife is a kitabiyya, because the evidence is general. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. What is the iddah of the pregnant woman who has also become widowed? Give evidence to support your answer. Question number 2. What are 4 types of things which are not allowed for the woman to use during the ihdad period? Question number 3. What is al-li'an, and describe the procedure?